Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we extract the foundational knowledge from seemingly disparate source materials. Today, we are wrestling with a profound and really complex question of duty. What is the moral equation for the modern craftsman, the engineer, the defense contractor, the systems designer, when the instruments they are building are explicitly designed for conflict or, even destruction?
It's a deep dive into tension, truly. It really is. We're looking at the philosophical dilemma faced by those who enable modern security. How do they reconcile a deep ethical devotion to their craft to being a, quote, good man made better with the high-stakes, morally complex reality of producing instruments of conflict?
And our source material today is structured to provide a kind of ethical mirror for this. We have texts outlining the professional realities of the defense industrial base and corporate compliance, which we are juxtaposing against centuries-old moral architecture of Freemasonry, its history, its tenets, and the profound symbolic weight of its working tools.
Exactly. We are using that moral architecture, the concepts of duty, fidelity, and the pursuit of moral perfection, as a precise framework. Our mission today is to unpack the symbolic meaning of the level and determine how the pursuit of moral perfection aligns or perhaps tragically conflicts with the intensely regulated and yet often morally ambiguous world of crafting tools of war.
Let's start at the foundation then, the moral craftsmanship itself. So we should start with the blueprint, I think. What is the fundamental stated purpose of the craft? It sounds, from the sources, highly aspirational, yet somehow very grounded.
At its most basic, the aim is intensely focused on self-improvement. The stated goal is to make good men even better. It's all designed to strengthen an individual's character, improve their moral and spiritual outlook, and broaden their mental horizons. And this is done through shared knowledge and a really disciplined practice. It's not passive learning. It requires active moral engagement.
So how is that moral compass structured? What are the key pillars supporting this goal of, personal development?
Well, the entire moral structure rests on this universal doctrine of the brotherhood of man and the fatherhood of God, which suggests a kind of universal moral accountability that transcends any local or temporary allegiances. This is then reinforced by the active practice of the three principal tenets: brotherly love, relief, and truth. These principles are intended to instill immediate personal responsibility in the daily lives of the members.
And this responsibility, it starts at home, doesn't it? It's not some abstract thing you only think about in the lodge.
Crucially, yes. That's a key point in the source material. It emphasizes that membership is a solemn and serious undertaking that mandates personal responsibility in one's home and in society. It even extends to the good care of those who depend on him. So this immediately defines the professional scope of duty. It has to start with ensuring the stability and well-being of his dependents. Every action taken professionally must align with this foundational duty of care.
And the language itself confirms this expectation of work, of labor. Members are called craftsmen, and the lodges are referred to as quarries or scenes of toil. They are given working tools, which are really the instruments of moral instruction.
Precisely. They are not abstract concepts or just, nice ideas. They are tangible symbols that are meant to bridge principle and practice. And for our deep dive today, we really have to focus on three of them: the level, the square, and the plumb rule. These are the working tools of a fellow craft Freemason.
Okay, let's elaborate on their moral application. Operatively, I get it. The level ensures horizontals are true, and the plumb rule makes sure verticals are straight. Simple enough.
The operative use is all about precision and stability, building something that will last. But the moral application of the level is really the core of our discussion today. It symbolizes that Masons meet on a common level. This is the great equalizer. When they assemble in the lodge, they are meant to be free from the distinctions of the outside world class, status, rank, wealth. All of that is left at the door to ensure unity and focus on their shared moral task. And this principle is specifically intended to prevent the destructive friction of, say, sectarian religion or partisan politics from contaminating the ethical work they're trying to do.
So the level is ensuring the moral foundation is flat and true. It's eliminating the bumps of ego or hierarchy before the work can even begin. Okay, so what about the square?
The square is the instrument of rectitude, of moral straightness. Operatively, you use it to adjust right-angled corners to make sure they're perfect. Morally, it points out the straight and undeviating line of conduct laid down for our pursuit in the volume of the sacred law. So if the level ensures equal footing for everyone, the square ensures correct conduct and integrity for each individual on that level.
And then when you move up to the Master Mason's tools.
Right. Then you get the compasses, and the compasses define the outer limit. They remind members of unerring and impartial justice, and they're meant to define the limits of good and evil by containing all earthly passions within their ethical boundaries. The entire system, from the very beginning, teaches the craftsman to act according to the laws of the divine creator.
This entire edifice, it sounds like it requires an unwavering fidelity, a loyalty that has to supersede any personal consequence. And the most powerful illustration of this in the sources is the legend of Hiram Abiff.
Yes, the legend of Hiram Abiff is the ultimate test of that commitment. He was the master builder of King Solomon's temple, and he was accosted by 3 workers who demanded he unlawfully release the secrets of a master mason because they wanted to, get advancement through deceit. He refused. He stood by his obligation of fidelity, honor, and secrecy, even though it resulted in his violent, tragic death.
That is an extreme measure of devotion. It really forces the question, is preserving one's obligation more important than preserving one's own life?
For Hiram Abiff, the answer was an unequivocal yes. His choice reinforced that loyalty to the principle of truth and fidelity is the absolute highest moral standard. And, as our sources note, it is profoundly important that the weapons used to strike him down, the plumb rule, the square, and the level, were the very tools of the craft. They were repurposed by men acting unlawfully and selfishly. Which highlights that the morality isn't in the object, not in the tool itself, but in the intent and fidelity of the person who's using that tool.
That's a critical point for our discussion. The tool isn't inherently good or evil. This intense focus on obligation naturally leads to a philosophical conflict that's relevant to any professional agent of the state. This tension between obedience and liberty.
It does. And we reference the philosopher Ruskin here, who challenged the very definition of liberty. Ruskin argued that obedience is actually necessary for stability and for genuine happiness. He makes the provocative claim that, and I'm quoting, "there is no such thing as liberty and never can be."
Meaning what, exactly? That's a pretty bold statement.
Meaning true freedom isn't found in the absence of rules, but in submitting to the correct ones. He says that man attains true liberty only by obedience to the laws of life and truth. In this framework, loyalty and fidelity are actually closer to the truth than a self-driven, individualistic concept of liberty. For the modern defense professional, this suggests that the highest obligation is unwavering fealty to establish professional and moral laws, not just, self-determination or self-enrichment.
And this internal structuring, this philosophy, it clearly mirrored external governance, especially in early America. We see a direct link to the Founding Fathers.
Absolutely. The historical record confirms a deep influence. The sources note that 14 U.S. presidents were confirmed Master Masons, including George Washington, Andrew Jackson, and Harry S. Truman. The structure of their moral lives informed their vision for the structure of the state.
Can we detail that connection more specifically, beyond just, Washington being a Mason? How did these principles actually translate into foundational American law and strategy?
Well, consider Benjamin Franklin. His instrumental diplomatic efforts, particularly in securing French support during the Revolution, were significantly aided by his Masonic status. He was serving as master of the Lodge of Nine Sisters in Paris, and those shared ties provided a pre-existing structure of trust and common values, which was, invaluable for high-stakes diplomacy. It created a common level between nations, in a way.
And what about the spirit of governance itself?
The very spirit of mutual respect and tolerance that's necessary for the First Amendment was deeply ingrained in the craft. The fraternity requires adherence to moral law and a belief in a divine creator, but it specifically prohibits discussions that would cause division, namely sectarian religion and partisan politics. This commitment to non-dogmatic tolerance directly informed the American experiment in religious freedom. The sources even note the principle was carried in the Freemasons' heart as sacred law. And furthermore, early organizational plans like the Albany Plan drew structural inspiration from Masonic constitutions regarding unified governance and the election processes for Grand Masters. This suggests a parallel between the Grand Lodge structure and early concepts of federalism. The foundation of the craft was, in many ways, foundational to the architecture of the state.
Okay, this sets the stage perfectly. We have a robust moral structure built on equality, truth, fidelity, and obedience to a higher law. Now, we have to drag these precise ancient tools into the messy, complicated quarry of the 21st century. So the ancient craftsmen built edifices of stone. The modern craftsmen in the defense industrial base, the DIB, they build complex systems, they write code, they design kinetic instruments. Let's first look at the defining characteristic of this modern workforce, the blurring lines between the state and the private sector.
Right. The DIB is massive. It covers everything from R&D and design to maintenance and production. The key modern challenge, and our sources are very clear on this, is a rise of private security firms, PSFs, and defense companies, filling roles that were historically reserved for uniformed military personnel. This outsourcing fundamentally challenges the professional boundaries of the military itself.
And these private entities, they often claim a status that grants them the moral authority of the state, but without the traditional military accountability structures. Is that right?
Just exactly. Employees of private security firms, especially those with prior military or law enforcement backgrounds who are deployed overseas, they lay claim to being agents of the state, albeit indirect ones. They perform functions of state power security, logistics, sometimes even intelligence gathering. But their primary fiduciary duty is to their corporation and its shareholders, not necessarily to the state or the public good. And this is the origin of the dual loyalty we have to analyze.
Before we dig into the corporate metrics, we have to address the reductionist stereotype of the mercenary. It's a loaded term.
It is. The designation mercenary seeks to simplify motivation, claiming it's all about wealth and financial gain. However, the comprehensive research we're looking at counters this tidy psychological reduction. While high pay is certainly a factor, the motivations driving former military personnel often involve a desire for continued high-stakes professional engagement, a dedication to the mission, or a sense of identity that transcends mere transactional employment. It's more complex.
And how does the provided anecdote illustrate that complexity? The one about the personnel in Iraq.
Well, the story of the four former military personnel who joined an inadequately resourced security firm in Iraq, only to be kidnapped and executed by insurgents, is just heartbreaking proof of this complexity. If their only driving force was money, they would likely have chosen better funded, better equipped organizations, or just avoided that level of risk altogether. Their willingness to enter a high-risk scenario, even with poor corporate support, suggests a commitment to a perceived mission or a professional continuity that the simplistic term mercenary completely fails to capture.
Okay, so let's pivot to the corporate side, where success is measured very differently. It's about client satisfaction, profit margins. The Blackwater example is the perfect, if tragic, illustration of tactical success versus ethical failure.
It is. In defense of his company, Eric D. Prince rightly pointed to an undeniable corporate achievement. During their entire contract providing security for U.S. State Department personnel in Iraq, and I'm quoting, not one single State Department employee had had so much as a hair on his or her head disturbed. Judged purely on the tactical level, protecting the client Blackwater was highly effective, successful.
The ethical calculus, however, was devastating. The corporate success of that security detail came at a profound and still unresolved ethical cost.
The cost was political and moral. The wider political price paid was the defamation of American uniformed service personnel, who were wrongly associated with the overly aggressive and high-profile actions of the contractors. And, maybe even more damaging, the profound alienation of the local Iraqi populace. Remember, the principal strategic objective of the entire war was supposedly winning hearts and minds and establishing stability. Blackwater's corporate triumph, in that sense, actively undermined the moral authority and legitimacy of the overall mission. This deep contradiction, where the level of corporate success completely skews the square of political morality, remains a defining challenge for the entire industry.
This brings us directly to modern mechanisms of fidelity corporate oversight. If the individual craftsman is bound by the square, then the corporation is bound by its fiduciary duty.
Right. And the legal framework for this is the fiduciary duty of oversight, which was articulated most forcefully in the Caremark standard in corporate law. This requires corporate directors to assure, in good faith, that the corporation maintains rigorous reporting systems. And these systems have to be designed to provide timely and accurate information, especially, and this is crucial, addressing mission-critical compliance risks.
That sounds an awful lot like the modern application of prudence, which our Masonic sources define as skill and good judgment.
It is the secular, legalistic application of prudence. A failure in oversight isn't just poor management, it's a failure of corporate fidelity. The Clotus Oncology derivative litigation provides a really clean example of this. Board members were sued for failing to adequately oversee a clinical trial. They allegedly ignored inaccurate reporting that violated FDA regulations. This wasn't a tactical business failure, it was an ethical oversight failure, a failure of the corporate square that placed the entire corporate mission, which was drug approval, in jeopardy.
Okay, let's connect this requirement for corporate vigilance directly to the defense industry's regulatory backbone. I'm talking about things like ITAR and DFARS. These seem like the modern, formalized compasses and square for the entire defense industrial base.
Absolutely, that's a perfect analogy. The DIB is governed by incredibly stringent regulations designed to maintain public integrity and national security. The International Traffic in Arms Regulations, ITAR for instance, controls the export of sensitive defense articles and technology. Adherence to ITAR demands immense self-discipline and strict ethical boundaries around information management. It's a direct echo of the compasses defining the limits of acceptable conduct. Compliance itself is an act of corporate prudence.
And DFARS goes even deeper into the relationship between the government and the contractor, acting as a guarantor of public trust.
That's right. The Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, DFARS, particularly in areas concerning anti-corruption and conflicts of interest, aims to enforce the level of integrity in professional conduct. The GAO, for example, suggested amending DFARS to strengthen constraints on the revolving door phenomenon, government personnel moving directly into lobbying roles within defense firms.
And why is that specific regulatory push so essential for maintaining fidelity?
Because the regulation aims to safeguard the Defense Department from contracting with companies whose employees violate lobbying restrictions with their employer's knowledge. This creates a sense of shared accountability that forces the corporate structure itself to adopt vigilance and probity, rather than just relying on the individual employee to do the right thing. DFARS compliance, especially around complex issues like supply chain security and cybersecurity risks, is the legal mandate for the level and the square. It demands that every contractor meet the government on a common level of moral and professional integrity, free from the self-interest of lobbying or undue influence.
So whether we're talking about centuries-old symbols or 21st century regulations, the professional life of the craftsman must be structured by a system of external accountability, a system that demands fidelity to a higher objective purpose. We've established this necessity of fidelity, of accountability. Now let's re-engage with that core symbolic tool, the level. If the defense professional is an agent of the state, as you said, how does the level's principle of meeting on a common level inform their duty, especially when their compensation and their expertise might place them far, far above the average citizen they're supposed to be serving?
Well, the level is the great equalizer. It's a fundamental check on pride and status. The ritual explicitly teaches that when Masons meet, we are all on a common level, end quote. In the context of defense work, this suggests that the ultimate professional duty has to transcend personal financial gain, or corporate stock performance, or even temporary partisan political favor. The level forces the professional to recognize that they are not exempt from the universal moral law simply because they are highly specialized or highly compensated. They are still on the level with everyone else.
So the morality of the action, the integrity of the work, must supersede the profitability of the contract?
Exactly. The duty must rest instead on objective, universal principles, the common good, justice, and societal stability. The level ensures that the pursuit of personal perfection, that goal of making good men better, cannot be divorced from the pursuit of public integrity.
And this leads us directly to the core ethical conundrum for anyone listening who works in this field. That tension between ethical devotion to the grand architect of the universe and the actual crafting of instruments of conflict. How can one ethically devote themselves to the divine creator while designing technology that is meant to kill?
This is a question of intent and accountability. And the working tools themselves provide the answer. The Master Mason uses the compasses, the square, and also the pencil. And the pencil teaches us that our words and actions are observed and recorded by the Almighty Architect, to whom we must give an account of our conduct through life.
So the idea is that the purpose of all this work, this craft, is preparation. Preparation to ascend to the grand lodge above. The ethical devotion to the craft is a duty to God because it is the preparation for that final accountability. It's about the record you're leaving.
Precisely. The morality is therefore not in the destructive potential of the tool itself, but in the adherence to the ethical constraints, the limits of good and evil defined by the compasses, during that tool's design, its production, and its eventual deployment. To act ethically is to ensure the instrument is built for justice and the common good, not for malicious intent or aggressive expansion or personal gain.
We can reinforce this idea of a rational universal duty by looking at Stoicism. It seems to provide a parallel concept to this objective moral law of the grand architect.
It really does. Marcus Aurelius, in the Sources, emphasizes that man is inherently made for cooperation. He cites examples like feet, like hands, like eyelids, like the rows of the upper and lower teeth. And this means that to act against the common interest, to act unjustly or with destructive self-interest, is contrary to man's very constitution. It's like a hand refusing to work with the other hand.
So if the defense contractor sees themselves as a hand working with the foot and the eye as part of a unified cooperative state structure, then their devotion must ultimately serve justice in society.
That is the highest standard. The ethical devotion must ensure that the output of their labor, even if it's a tool of war, serves the maintenance of rational order, not the introduction of irrational chaos or self-serving dominance.
This synthesis seems to demand an unwavering obedience and a critical self-discipline, which the Blackwater example showed can easily fail when corporate success is prioritized over the level of moral integrity.
Absolutely. The ethical life demands obedience and loyalty to principles, the laws of life, and truth over self-interest, or what the sources call superfluity, meaning excess. And we can draw a striking modern secular parallel here with the operational philosophy of site reliability engineering, SRE, which constantly struggles against inefficiency and excess in complex systems.
That's an interesting connection. Tell us how the SRE philosophy of rejecting toil relates to the Masonic rejection of superfluity.
Well, SRE aims to maximize the time engineers spend on impactful, forward-looking work and to minimize toil, which they define as repetitive, low-value manual work. To do this, they define acceptable system performance through what they call service-level objectives, SLOs, and they rigorously manage an error budget, a precise, pre-agreed allowance for system failure. This system demands constant, quantifiable vigilance and learning from every mistake.
So it's a corporate discipline designed to enforce prudence and prevent ethical or operational drift.
It is. Their intense postmortem culture, where they conduct blameless analyses of every failure to learn from it, is a modern, secular application of the pencil, ensuring accountability for what's been recorded. By rigorously defining acceptable limits, like the compasses, and committing to continuous self-correction, like the square, the SRE philosophy rejects organizational superfluity or waste. Similarly, the defense contractor's duty to public integrity, which is enforced by regulations like DFARS, demands the rejection of superfluity, undue profit, excessive influence, or cutting corners in favor of objective, measurable vigilance.
So the lesson of the level in the 21st century quarry is that it mandates an equality and accountability. It ensures that the highest commitment of the professional is to truth, prudence, and service to the common good, regardless of whether they are building a cathedral or a cruise missile.
The professional has to internalize that their work, no matter how technical or specialized, is ultimately being recorded by the grand architect. And that reality demands that their duty align with principle over self-interest. Always.
Today, we took the level and the square, these ancient symbols of moral guidance, and we held them up to the complex reality of modern defense contracting and corporate duty. We saw that the structures of an ethical life, fidelity, obedience, vigilance, they're constants. They're merely re-expressed through modern regulations like ITAR and DFARS.
And we found that even when the professional is involved in building the tools of war, their highest obligation is not to the instrument itself, or even to the immediate triumph of the client. It's to an unwavering professional and moral fidelity. The moral failure occurs when the level of corporate success allows the square of public integrity to become unbalanced.
As we close, we are left with a powerful directive from a master mason who understood the awesome responsibility of State Power President Harry S. Truman. He addressed the UN Conference on International Organization, stating, "The responsibility of the great states is to serve and not dominate the peoples of the world."
And if the ultimate ethical duty of the state is service, then the ethical duty of the contractor building for the state must also be fundamentally rooted in service, not merely in the profitable delivery of destruction. The question for you, the learner, is this. When assessing the success of your own professional life, how do you ensure that the level of your ambition remains perfectly true to the square of public service, guaranteeing that your devotion to the craft aligns with truth rather than just triumph?